We're live.
Good evening. It's October the 18th, 2022, and I want to welcome everyone to this meeting of the Cannabis Legalization Workgroup. This is a virtual workgroup meeting, so please be patient if we encounter any technical or streaming issues. Before we begin, I remind everybody that this briefing is being streamed on the Maryland General Assembly's YouTube channel. Workgroup members will be muted throughout the briefing. If you have a question after our presentations, use the raise your hand function within your Zoom window. I hope you've all here on the Zoom and watching the stream have had a good and productive summer. With 3 weeks to go before we return to Annapolis for session, I'm glad that all of us have returned to the table to work on this important issue. I know it's a busy season for the members who have joined us this evening, so I want to thank you very much for taking the time to be here. Other members will be joining us shortly this evening. I also want to welcome a few additional legislators to this work group as we embark on this next phase of the legislative process related to cannabis legalization. From the House Ways and Means Committee, I welcome the former Vice Chair of the Judiciary Committee, Vanessa Atterbury. Delegate Atterbury will provide critical input on taxation components of the legislation. And from the Senate of Maryland, we welcome Senators Melody Griffith, Brian Feldman, and Steve Hershey. And I look forward to working and collaborating with them for the duration of our work group meeting schedule and with them and their colleagues into 2023 and beyond. So again, thank you all for being here. Tonight's agenda first, for the benefit of all work group members, especially our new participants, and for those viewing the meeting on live stream, will receive an overview of House Bill 1 and House Bill 837, which were passed through the 2022 legislative session. House Bill 1 was our referendum question, which is on the ballot here in 3 weeks. And House Bill 837 was the comprehensive policy package that would implement the public health framework and provisions relating to penalties, charging procedures, expungement, shielding, and sentencing for offenses involving cannabis upon the passage of the referendum question. To provide this overview, we'll hear from Claire Rossmark, counsel to the Judiciary Committee, and Aaron Hopwood, counsel in the Health and Government Operations Committee. After that overview, members are welcome to ask questions. After that, we'll hear from William Tilburg, the Executive Director of the Maryland Medical Cannabis Commission, and Jeffrey Kelly, Executive Director of the Maryland Alcohol and Tobacco Commission. They're going to provide an update on the report, one that was required after the passage of House Bill 837, that was related to the merger of the Maryland Medical Cannabis Commission and the Maryland Alcohol and Tobacco Commission. After their update and presentation, we'll open the floor again to questions between our work group members and Mr. Tilburg and Mr. Kelly. And with that, I also need to mention that I have left a person off who was added to the group. I mistakenly left off Delegate Janelle Wilkins, who is with us here this evening as well. And she is going to be joining us on the work group as well. So I apologize for missing her.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair.
And everyone, the chair of the Economic Matters Committee, the myth, the legend, Delegate C.T. Wilson, Chairman.
I left you a gift on your car yesterday, sir.
I saw that. It was appreciated. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, this is great. So let's go ahead and start with the first part of our hearing. We're going to hear from Claire Rossmark and Aaron Hopwood. We thank them for taking some time here this evening to speak with us. If you two are ready, who would like to go first, Claire or Aaron?
I will.
Great. So go ahead, Claire. We'll let you begin your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening. This past legislative session, 2 companion measures to initiate the process of legalization of adult use cannabis in the state were enacted. The first act, House Bill 1, Chapter 45, is a proposed constitutional amendment, which, if approved by the voters at the November 2022 general election, will authorize an individual who is at least 21 years old to use and possess cannabis in the state beginning July 1st, 2023. That authorization is subject to a requirement that the General Assembly pass legislation regarding the use, distribution, possession, regulation, and taxation of cannabis. The second act, House Bill 837, Chapter 26, alters various laws regarding the use, possession, and distribution of cannabis, mostly subject to the ratification of the constitutional amendment. Among other things, Chapter 26 repeals the term marijuana in the code and replaces it with cannabis, legalizes possession by a person at least 21 years old of no more than 1.5 ounces of cannabis or equivalent amounts, including no more than 2 cannabis plants, effective July 1st, 2023, makes it a finable civil offense for a person to possess up to 2.5 ounces of cannabis, reduces possession with intent to distribute cannabis to a misdemeanor subject to maximum penalties of 3 years imprisonment and or a $5,000 fine, and provides that possession of less than 2.5 ounces of cannabis without other evidence of an intent to distribute or dispense does not constitute possession with intent to distribute. The act also repeals criminal penalties associated with cannabis paraphernalia, authorizes a person incarcerated for a conviction related to possession of cannabis to apply to the court for resentencing, and requires the court to grant the application and resentence the person to time served. It further authorizes a person who is convicted of possession of cannabis to file a petition for expungement of the conviction after the satisfactory completion of the sentence, including probation. Authorizes a person who is convicted of possession with the intent to distribute cannabis to file a petition for expungement of the conviction 3 years after satisfaction of the sentence. Requires the Attorney General to provide the General Assembly with a formal opinion regarding the impact of cannabis legalization on the authority of police officers to conduct searches of individuals and vehicles based on detection of the odor of cannabis, and creates a subtraction modification against the state, individual, and corporate income tax for the amount of ordinary and necessary expenses paid or incurred during the taxable year in carrying on a trade or business as a state licensed medical cannabis grower, processor, or dispensary, or any other cannabis establishment licensed by the state. Aaron will now discuss the public health and business assistance aspects of Chapter 26.
So the bill also requires on or before January 1st, 2023, the Maryland Medical Cannabis Commission, in consultation with the Maryland Department of Health and other entities, to conduct or contract for a baseline study regarding various cannabis-related statistics, including patterns of use, incidents of impaired driving, hospitalizations, calls to poison control, and cannabis use disorder and problem cannabis use. The bill also requires the commission to submit a report on or before January 1st, 2023 on the findings of the baseline study to certain committees of the General Assembly, and beginning March 1st, 2025 and every other year thereafter, to survey those same factors from the baseline study using the same methodology and report on the findings. The bill requires the commission to study certain things, including home grow for patients to cultivate cannabis for personal use, the implementation of laws relating to on-site consumption areas, and how to make cannabis products that do not appeal to minors. The bill subjects the smoking of cannabis to the Clean Indoor Air Act. It also creates a Cannabis Public Health Advisory Council to study and make annual recommendations regarding various cannabis-related issues, including the impact of cannabis legalization on the education, behavioral health, and somatic health of individuals under the age of 21, addiction and misuse, advertising, labeling, and quality control, and education and public health programs. The bill creates a public health fund to address the health effects associated with the legalization of cannabis and support the Cannabis Public Health Advisory Council. The bill also establishes a cannabis business assistance fund to assist small, minority-owned, and women-owned businesses entering the cannabis industry, and establishes the Community Reinvestment and Repair Fund to provide funds to community-based organizations that serve communities determined by the Office of the Attorney General to have been the most impacted by disproportionate enforcement of the cannabis prohibition.
Okay. That gives an overview of where we are, at least right now, as we wait for the results of the referendum here in a few days. Are there questions for either Claire or for Aaron? Are there any questions? Wasn't sure that there would be a lot of questions here because we kind of already did that, but okay, that's fine. We thank you both very much for joining us this evening. And now we'll go to the second part of our meeting, where we're going to hear from Will Tilburg, the Executive Director of the Medical Cannabis Commission, and Jeffrey Kelly, the Executive Director of the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission, who are going to provide an update on the report related to the merger of the Medical Cannabis Commission and the ATC that was required in 837. So with that, Mr. Tilburg, let's begin with you.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the work group. With your permission, Jeff and I are gonna split this up. We've worked great together over the past 4 months in putting the report together with our staffs and commissions, and so we'd like to sort of go back and forth and share the presentation this evening. So just for the record, Will Tilburg, Executive Director for the Maryland Medical Cannabis Commission. Pleased to be here tonight alongside Jeff Kelly of the ATC. And I think I speak for both of us and our staffs and the shared belief that the combination of these entities will provide the state with better operations and regulation for alcohol, tobacco, and cannabis. With that, I'll turn it over to Jeff for some opening remarks.
Thanks, Will. Not much else to say, Mr. Chairman and members of the work group. Thanks for having us tonight. Thanks for letting us be a part of this. We're really very grateful for that, and we hope we get to continue to be if you decide that would be helpful for you as well. Again, I'm Jeff Kelly. I'm the Executive Director of the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission, which is fairly new. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And as Will said, we've worked great, not only over the last 4 years, but Will and I have personally known each other for probably over a decade. He worked extensively in the area of tobacco regulation and health and public safety as well, as did we through then the Comptroller's Office and the Field Enforcement Division specifically. So we've got years of being able to work together. And I think what we found is there's a lot of synergy also between our two organizations over the last 4 months in coming together this report. So with that, thank you, Will. Appreciate it.
Okay, so Dylan, are we able to transition to slides? Great. So the next slide, if we can. Okay, so the report itself, how this will sort of lay out tonight is I'll discuss what the requirements were in detail. Jeff will then introduce ATC, what their operations are like currently. I'll do the same for MMCC, and then we will alternate in the work that we performed and the recommendations that we were providing to this body and to the General Assembly. So this requirement for report came again from Section 8 uncodified of HB 837, and pending the results of the referendum, it's the intent of the General Assembly that the Office of the Executive Director of the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission will be the successor agency to the Medical Cannabis Commission in matters concerning the regulation of medical cannabis. And that last piece about relating to medical cannabis is something that I think we'll talk about a little later on. It is also the intent to transfer the personnel from the Medical Cannabis Commission to ATC, and that's to be jointly studied by the commissions. And so in that study, which we've been working on and we're to submit to the General Assembly by January 1st, is supposed to contemplate minimizing the cost of the transfer, resulting in a more cost-efficient operation, not resulting in the diminution of any pay or working conditions, et cetera, and allowing personnel to retain any merit system or retirement status they may have. So that is the scope of the work that our two commissions performed. And I'm happy to say that, we were able to share the report well ahead of schedule with this work group today. Again, January 1st deadline, but we got the ball rolling quickly after session, and so are pleased with the results and to be able to share the report well ahead of schedule here in October. Next slide, please.
Okay. The Alcohol and Tobacco Commission, it was created in 2019 by the General Assembly and specifically through House Bill 1052. It was enacted to begin on July 1st, 2020. Enter COVID. That put it off, and very graciously, the General Assembly gave us a 6-month extension. So we actually became effective on January 1st, 2021. It's comprised of 5 voting members. Each of those has to represent a certain field. One from with a health background, one with a law enforcement background, 2 of them with some sort of financial background, and the 5th is with a background in the industry, but with the caveat that they are no longer actively involved in the industry. We have those five individuals, and we have some ex officio non-voting members, one being that of either the secretary or representative designee of the Maryland Department of Health, and the secretary of the Maryland State Police or designee as well. And in both cases, they're designees. The Office of the Executive Director, which is a component within the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission, and that's my job, my role, is responsible for the oversight regulation of the alcohol, beverages, tobacco industries. Essentially, we do everything soup to nuts. People apply to us, we process the applications, we issue licenses or permits if they are eligible. We conduct inspections of those entities. Once they're up and running, we continue to inspect them for compliance. When there's an issue of non-compliance, we bring them in before us for hearings. And also, just to say, we've started to move we've been moving continually, and thank you to Chairman Wilson, who's on this in this meeting tonight. We've been able to start moving and continually move the law from under the comptroller's purview to that of the ATC. But also, we've just recently completed the beginning, at least, of the migration of COMAR regulations from the comptroller to the ATC. It's just recently been published in the Maryland Registry, and if everything goes well, we expect by early December the sets of regulations concerning alcohol and tobacco will be within the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission's specific purview. And through the Office of the Executive Director is a division also created by this act called the Field Enforcement Division. Previously, that was a division that existed within the Comptroller's Office. That division was removed from the Comptroller's Office. It is a division that's comprised of the licensing staff of all of their applicants, but also of the sworn officers who enforce the regulations and the laws. And it's relative to the manufacture, transportation, sales, storage, importation of alcohol and tobacco, but it's also in conjunction with the comptroller, the taxing of these products. We have compliance agents who go out and do well. Let me just say this: compliance agents have always kind of existed within the comptroller's office for decades and decades and decades. And then around 1999. The Field Enforcement Division was formed under Governor Schaefer, and he brought the enforcement agents from his agency all in one area, one division. And over the years, that was expanded to start taking on alcohol and tobacco enforcement and regulatory responsibility, and motor fuel enforcement, licensing, and regulatory responsibility. And then with the creation of the ATC, it continues to exist with the sworn officers and being a law enforcement agency. And now there's still another agency with the comptroller. So when we split, a small police force remained with the comptroller, a larger portion of the police force moved to the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission. Next slide, please. Just very briefly, we have in the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission currently, we have 39 positions. We started with 31, and Governor Hogan requested, and you all appropriated, thank you very much, an additional 8 positions, so we're up to 39 full-time equivalents. They work in 2 divisions. The largest division is the Field Enforcement Division, which has a Field Operations Bureau. Those are all our sworn agents who are stationed across the state. And then we have the Regulatory Administrative Bureau, which are some of our investigators, inspectors, our licensing experts. And just to give you a sense of that, right into our licensing area, we have 3 full-time people who work on licensing, and it's a monumental task. There are tens of thousands of licenses and permits that they issue every year. It's done just by these 3 people, and it's pretty magnificent output when you consider the scope of what they do. Our other division is new. It's the Legal and Legislative Division. It's currently staffed with 3 people. 2 of them are attorneys. What's really unique about those attorneys and really beneficial to us is one of them is a fellow named Tom Acker. Some of you may know Tom. Tom was involved in Baltimore City operations. He was specifically working for the liquor board for years, where he was the deputy executive secretary. He understands how the regulatory effort works. He understands it, especially at the local level, and can bring that unique perspective, and he does, to the ATC. And then we've just recently brought on a second employee. His name is Jeff Hand. Jeff was a prosecutor in the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office and brings about 10 years worth of experience to us as well. So we're pretty well suited to handle a variety of different issues. The ATC has about a $5.3 million fund, general fund supported budget each year, and we are physically located where we were before. That was one of the requirements, really, is in the creation of the ATC, that it remain where they are. The idea was same people doing the same work, same phones, desks, equipment, et cetera. And pretty much we've been able to hold to that. We still have our office space in the comptroller's office, in the Treasury building, I should say. The comptroller has been and his staff have been very gracious to us and have been really helped us quite a bit. We are tight on space. At some point, that might be something we need to look at, and we address that in our report that Will had mentioned. But currently, we are on the same campus. Just as something that it's a point of interest, if you are in town and would like to see what our storage rooms look like for contraband product and evidence, it's kind of an impressive thing to see. It covers almost half of the footprint of the Treasury building, if you know how big that is, and I'm sure you do. It's in the basement, covers about half of that footprint. So there's several rooms and a lot of product there. It might be worth seeing. We'll be taking all this in consideration, obviously, now with how we might be dealing with cannabis, should that arise. Next slide, please.
All right, so now for the MMCC, the commission is an independent commission that functions within the Department of Health, and that's an important piece to note as we look to future transition, because the Department of Health does provide certain essential services to the commission, including procurement support, HR support, and along with DoIT, some IT support. The commission is 100% specially funded. It had for FY23 a budget of $9.5 million. That is higher than normal and includes some one-time costs associated with the build out of a really critical reference laboratory for the commission. Currently in Maryland and many states across the country, laboratory testing for health and safety purposes for cannabis is done exclusively by private labs. And so it's our belief that we can improve compliance and product quality and safety if we do have our own state reference abilities. The mission of the commission is to provide a safe, effective, and consumer-friendly medical cannabis program for qualified patients. And the major program functions include the four listed here. So licensing and regulation of medical cannabis businesses. And this is an area to highlight one of the differences between alcohol and tobacco and cannabis. Jeff talked about the tens of thousands of licenses that fall under those categories. Currently, we have 150 cannabis growers, processors, and dispensaries that are authorized in statute. Then the second program function is registration and regulation of patients, caregivers, and certifying providers. At present, we have more than 160,000 qualifying patients in the state. The caregivers is around 7,000, and certifying providers is just shy of 2,000. And that, again, includes physicians, but also dentists, podiatrists, certified nurse midwives, and nurse practitioners. Any of those licensed individuals can serve as a certifying provider within the state. Similar to ATC, we are charged with enforcement of authorizing statutes and regulations to ensure product and patient safety and licensee compliance, although we do not have sworn law enforcement officers that are within our commission. And the final major program function, really critical, is public education on the medical cannabis program and its laws and regulations, as it's a significant deviation from the state's previous laws regarding cannabis. In the past, when I have presented to this work group and more broadly the General Assembly, we've talked a fair amount about licensing of businesses and changes that have been made to the program since 2018, particularly through House Bill 2, which was emergency legislation. What I don't know that I've discussed in the past is that Cannabis Commission Reform Act also reconstituted the commission and its staff itself. So effective in October 1st of 2019, all previous commissioners were eliminated, and the total number of commissioners was reduced from 16 to 13. The commissioners are the ultimate statutorily authorized individuals. Now are 13 volunteers who serve 4-year terms. There are 9 who are appointed by the governor with advice and consent of the Senate. 3 are selected from a list provided by the Senate President and Speaker of the House, and 1 is the Secretary of Health designee. A big focus of that legislation in 2018 was diversifying the program. That meant diversifying those entities that are licensed by the commission. It also meant diversifying the commission itself and its staff. And we currently have 12 commissioners. There is 1 vacancy. Of those 12, 9 are women or minority members, and 6 of them are Black or African-American members, including the chair and vice chair. Next slide, please. The commission members themselves, again, that's the statutorily designated authority, are supported by full-time staff of 77 positions. We do have several vacancies, as you can see here from that 10 FTE number. Another thing I'd like to highlight here is that 46 out of those 77 positions are temporary or contractual roles. That's 60%. If you contrast that with ATC, 38 out of 39 of their positions are merit positions, meaning the individuals have retirement, health insurance, and paid vacation time. And so that's something that we've not been able to offer for most of our employees, and has led to issues with retaining and attracting talent. Our current office space, we have a 10,000 square foot commercial office space in Linthicum, and then that's been supplemented earlier this year within the same building, 3,900 square feet for the build out of a reference laboratory for laboratory personnel. We accommodate the 77 FTEs across 16 offices, 41 cubicles, and so our spaces are already full given existing office footprint, and so that's already allocated to MMCC personnel. In addition, we have 16 vehicles. Next slide, please.
Okay, so just to give you a sense of how we got started, we took it very seriously, obviously. We started back in April. We met about a dozen times. Our last meeting was as recent as last Tuesday, where we kind of finalized our report. And we did what you asked us to do. We took a look at the personnel from both sides, for both commissions. We looked at how much space we had, vehicles, operations, and we'll get into what we kind of found, but that gives you a sense of where we started looking. We largely stayed within the scope of the mandate of the report, but we did discuss some policy points. Should at some point you decide you'd like to get some input from us, we are prepared to offer some of that. Another thing we did was we took a look at how the ATC was formed and how the people were transferred from the comptroller to this new agency, because the General Assembly, you guys, went way out of your way to make certain that the staff would be protected, that there wouldn't be anybody harmed by this, in this case, a split of an agency into 2. And so we looked at that as really a pretty good model of how we could conjoin 2 agencies as well. And you'll see our language would reflect that. And one other thing we did was we met with a couple of states that are sort of similar to what Maryland might be going to should the referendum pass, and that being perhaps a regulatory agency that's responsible for alcohol and or tobacco and cannabis. And most specifically, the ones that mirror us or would mirror us, or we would mirror them perhaps, is Oregon and Washington. And just recently, Will and his team and me and mine spoke with the Washington leadership as well, and got a lot of really great insight that we'll go into a little bit later. And we have a meeting scheduled also for Oregon, and expect to have that be equally beneficial. And what's interesting, just again to show you relationships and the importance of them, through my work over the years in alcohol enforcement, I know very well the directors of both Washington and Oregon from an alcohol standpoint. Conversely, Will knows them very well from a cannabis standpoint, because both of those states have been doing this for a while. So it just is really a good symbiotic relationship, I think. Next slide, please.
All right, so what are we recommending? That's what this slide covers, and we'll go into a little more detail in the remaining 3 slides here today. So first, MMCC personnel will either transfer to a newly established Cannabis Regulatory and Enforcement Division within ATC, or merge into existing shared administrative and operational functions under the Office of the Executive Director on or after July 1st, 2023. Second, all MMCC personnel will transfer without any change of loss of pay, working conditions, etc. Retain any merit system or retirement status they may have on the date of transfer. 3, Effective July 1st, 2023, ATC and MMCC will merge common administrative and operational functions and units, including communications, human resources, budget and finance, procurement, legal and legislative, and research and education. 4, ATC and MMCC will retain existing office space and study the need for additional office space and secure storage to accommodate organizational growth and the regulation of adult use cannabis. 5, we have to use all existing materials that have our existing logos, be it MMCC or ATC, if there's a name change to add cannabis to that, before ordering any others. So essentially what is being proposed here, what is being recommended jointly by the commissions, is that July 1st, the transition of personnel will take place, and there would be a new cannabis regulatory and enforcement division for cannabis, in the same vein as there is an existing field enforcement division within the office of the executive director for alcohol and tobacco. We also identified several areas, which are listed there in bullet point 3, where we have shared needs, and we have staff that can perform those functions for both alcohol and tobacco and for cannabis. And so this is the goal here, is to seamlessly transition and to streamline operations and combine where possible. Next slide, please.
So this is what we propose we look like. Under the Office of the Executive Director, starting with the left, the Alcohol Tobacco Field Enforcement Division, that's largely the group that exists today in the ATC that does the work of enforcing, licensing, regulating those two industries. That will remain largely the same, not entirely. And then I'd like to move over 2 more, if I may, now to the Legal and Legislative Division. That division also currently exists in the Office of the Executive Director. However, we don't have any assistant attorneys general. We use one part-time that currently is assigned full-time to the comptroller. The assistant attorneys general that are currently within the Cannabis Commission will move over to this Legal and Legislative Division and liaison through the internal counsel. Going one left again to the Public Health and Business Operations, this is going to be our logistics crew, and it's going to be our public health. A big mandate of the ATC and correspondingly, I think, to the Maryland Medical Cannabis Commission is to work toward the betterment of public health, to provide education, to conduct studies and issue reports. So we're going to put that entity, we currently have some under the Field Enforcement Division of the ATC, and we'll have some under the Cannabis Commission. We look to combine those and see if we can't find commonalities there, as well as moving some of those areas that Will just talked about, the finance and procurement, human resources and communications, putting all of that under a newly formed Public Health and Business Operations Division. And then lastly, and maybe most importantly, the Cannabis Regulatory Enforcement Division will be, except for those logistical operations we just talked about that we will put probably under Public Health and Business Ops, that will be the Medical Cannabis Commission as it kind of looks today. The intent being, and we'll use the perfect phrase, seamless transition. The intent for us in creating it this way, and this is everything we don't know about adult use. And this is not adult use. This is existing medical cannabis, the function of medical cannabis. We want to make certain that when people end their days on June 30th of 2023 and begin their days on July 1st, the practitioners, the providers, the manufacturers, suppliers, and very importantly, the customers, or even more the patients of the Cannabis Commission, don't know that a change has taken place. We plan on doing lots of announcing and lots of communicating to let them know it happened. But from an operations standpoint, we're going to work very hard to make certain that they don't realize a change occurred. We were able to do that fairly successfully, moving from the comptroller to the ATC. We have a little experience with that, and we intend on doing the same thing with the medical cannabis, moving that over to the Office of the Executive Director. And all of this gives us, it lays out for us an 18 to 24 month plan of being able to start day one, hit the ground running, no interruption, and then have a little bit of time after that to start looking at the policies that you've created that you want enacted, and we can start knocking those off and bringing that element online as well, if that's the direction you wish to go in. Next slide, please.
So just to drill down a little bit more on what Jeff was describing with the shared operational and administrative services, that's what we're looking at here. This is what combined the commissions believe can be combined post-transition almost immediately. And so again, their communications, human resources, budget and finance, procurement, public health research, and education. These are areas where folks can be cross-trained pretty easily, or can, from the get-go, be assuming duties beyond just cannabis or alcohol and tobacco, actually providing them for the entire body. And so as a little insight of what these different areas are doing, communications, for us, it's managing the website, Public Information Act requests, developing, disseminating press releases, bulletins, etc. So those are things that you don't need a specific expertise in alcohol, tobacco, or cannabis. You can provide it for both. Human resources, a similar vein. So these are the areas that we think from day one truly can be combined, but they come with two conditions. The first is we're talking about the continuation of medical cannabis here, and not any expansion that may be required post referendum to cover adult use and whatever that may look like following the 2023 legislative session. And second, that as I mentioned at the outset, talking about MMCC, and Jeff mentioned talking about ATC, we receive support services right now in HR, in procurement, in communications, in IT, for MMCC, the Department of Health, and for ATC in the comptroller. If those services are not continued, then this calculation changes, and there would need to be additional staffing in order to fully take on areas like human resources, like IT, like communications. Next slide, please.
And I'm just going to say, if you're keeping score on that, the ATC wins, because we have so few people who can help us provide those necessary functions, and really getting the additional assistance from the MMCC is a huge win for the ATC. So some of the functions we think have to remain separate, at least for the time being, and until some policy decisions are made, are number one, enforcement. And I'll tell you just very briefly, in the beginning, I think we all agreed that enforcement could be done. We have these agents that I'm very proud of, and I think they're very smart people. I think they can figure out a lot of problems. They're good problem solvers. And I pretty confidently thought they're going to be able to pick up how to enforce the cannabis stuff. And I think they still can. But originally we were thinking, we're gonna cross-train everybody. They're going to know how to do cannabis enforcement. The cannabis inspectors are going to learn how to do some alcohol, tobacco stuff, and this is going to work great. And that's what we believed up until we met with Washington State. And the whole discussion with Washington State, they kind of went over everything, and our questions are all geared toward how do you operate? How does your licensing work? How many people do you have? How many license holders do you have? And then when we were kind of done the business discussion, and we were just kind of a little bit of just a loose discussion, Rick Garza, who's the director of the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board, kind of off the cuff said, oh, I got to tell you, when we first started, we thought our enforcement people could do both things. We thought they could do alcohol and cannabis. We were very confident that they could. And then within a couple of years, we realized that was a big mistake, because the enforcement and the regulatory efforts of cannabis are dramatically different than those for alcohol, and I'd say then also for tobacco. The time amount, the expertise that's required is much more detailed. So he said after a couple of years, they realized everybody should be cross-trained and have a pretty good idea of what the others do in case they have to assist. But they ended up coming up with two distinct branches, one that enforces and regulates cannabis, and one that does the same for alcohol. And so up until that time, which is about a week and a half ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, I think we were pretty sure we'd be combining these at some point. We think now it's just going to require some more review and consideration, because there might be more to think about than our initial thoughts. Laboratories. The ATC does have access to a laboratory when we need it. The comptroller has a motor fuel laboratory in Jessup. They largely do motor fuel testing for quality of fuel, but they also have always done some testing for alcohol. And in many cases, it's just the presence of alcohol, not a specific type of alcohol that it is, but simply whether it exists or not, which is often all we needed when we'd have somebody standing on a street corner selling unmarked containers of what appeared to be alcohol. They would test it for us and verify that. We still have access to that lab. We actually used it over the summer. We spent a lot of time in Fells Point and made some seizures of people who were selling product exactly like this. And that lab is the one that tested it for us, gave us the positive results, which allowed us to go back and charge people with selling this alcohol without a license. And quite honestly, in nefarious manners, just on street corners out of coolers, no markings or labeling of what they could be. And at the same time, the MCC has reference lab. They have been budgeted for a reference lab and have the space for it now, and are hoping to build it soon and staff it. But in the meantime, we're not so certain that laboratory is going to be able to do the work, the alcohol work that the ATC has. We would look to continue using the comptroller's lab. And quite honestly, We don't use it that often for alcohol, so I don't think it's going to be a big issue. But as we move forward, we might find that with a little bit of modification, we could combine laboratories that could do both services very well. With IT, really, Will's already kind of mentioned that we receive IT support from the comptroller. Will gets it from Do It. It makes sense at some point that we put these things together, but right now we have a different licensing platform, which is tied very heavily into the comptroller's. They call it the Compass project, but it's I know you're very familiar with it. It's the integrated tax system that you guys are paying a lot of money for, have authorized a lot of money for, that does not only taxes, but it does licensing for a variety of areas. We've been tied into that for years, and we still are right now. There may be a point where we pull out from that, and maybe where Will pulls out from what he's got, and we find something that combines and and would make it good for all of us, and hopefully that'll be the case. But in the meantime, we do have necessarily different IT support, and part of that is the comptroller's office, because we do have access to this multi-integrated system that they have, has asked that we stay with them so that we can be secured behind the firewalls, and we reduce or minimize any opportunity for somebody to get into that. So we look to stay separate for the time being. Lastly, in quality assurance, from the ATC standpoint, this really doesn't come into play so much. One of the things I think that we're benefited by is packaging of tobacco products, and packaging of alcohol is really heavily regulated. So there's not a lot of opportunity that it's going to look very differently. It's regulated from a federal level, it's regulated from a state level. So there's not a whole lot of ways to play around with what packages look like and the product inside. And in the rare occasion where it can happen, and it's more likely to happen at a bar or tavern, or perhaps a restaurant, where someone takes a more premium whiskey, say, and puts it into a less premium whiskey, and then puts it into a more premium whiskey bottle and selling it at that premium price. We do come across that, and we have the capability of testing through an organization called DISCUS, which is the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States. So we have access to test for product specificity through them. Beyond that, quality assurance is so much an issue for us. But Will does staff a call center who takes calls from concerned individuals and answers questions about quality and just generally, I think, provides provider and patient guidance and direction. So go ahead and just send us to Will. Next slide, please.
Yeah, sorry, Dylan, can we actually stay on there for 1 second? I appreciate Jeff's comments and just wanted to highlight a couple of additional pieces. First, from enforcement, touching on, again, the distinction between ATC having sworn law enforcement officers and MMCC not, something that crops up a lot with rollouts of adult use cannabis are unlicensed retailers. And that's something that, as not having sworn law enforcement officials within our staffing, MMCC is not authorized to address. And we already receive inquiries now ahead of the referendum on shops that have been popping up throughout the state. So it's something for the General Assembly to consider about what a mechanism could or should be in terms of enforcement against unlicensed retailers or other licensees. The alcohol and tobacco model is that field enforcement division has that authority. The second piece with information technology, it's one of the central pieces of our discussions in this Joint Commission report was to ensure continued support for patients. We have 160,000 medical patients within the state, and this needs to truly be a seamless transition. And right now, when we talk about information technology, not only do we have different licensing systems, but our patients, they're restricted in the state to a certain amount of cannabis each month, and it's tracked through the seed to sale system. And so our licensing and registration system also allows those patients to check their allotment in real time. It goes well above and beyond a typical licensing or registration system. It took 2+ years to build out. And so significant thought would need to go into whether that's a platform that the medical cannabis program should be pivoting off of, and what that would look like long-term in the future. Jeff, I don't know, any additional thoughts before we go to the last?
Yeah. Last thing I would just say is referencing the support we get from MDH and from the Office of the Comptroller. Will and I have discussed that once the election is over and there is a comptroller-elect, we've been kind of tossing the idea around of meeting with the comptroller-elect to see if we can't shore up continued support, and to see if the comptroller-elect would be willing to support the ATC as it may look, to include all of the staff of the MMCC as well. And so our hope is we're going to get support still, comptroller or MDH, preferably it would be one. Hopefully the comptroller will be able to do that for all of us. And then meanwhile, that might be the time for us to start looking to branch off and get our own staff that can address HR, procurement, administration, and finance and such directly. That's it, Will. Thank you.
So then I guess the last slide, please. Thank you. So again, just the wrap up here, the scope of this request of the report was pretty narrow. It was, how are the operations of the medical cannabis program going to continue to operate post a transition from MMCC to ATC? This is obviously the referendum legalization work group with a different task. MMCC and ATC have worked separately on little p policy recommendations shared jointly about what adult use expansion could look like and provide insight from our regulator perspectives. And speaking specifically for MMCC, based on some of the things that I've shared with you tonight, I really focus on, for an expanded program, 3 Ps from what we've talked about. Number one is PINs. 60% of the staff is temporary contractual in the state, and that is not sustainable. There needs to be merit positions in order to retain talent and in order to attract new talent that you need with an expanded program in important areas like communications, community outreach, policy, science, laboratories. Procurement. There's a lot of procurement that needs to happen and pretty quickly related to seed to sale expansion, tax software, public education, post referendum, what does the law change mean for everybody? Education, outreach, and training, which has already been contemplated in HB 837 for licensing opportunities and training, specifically small minority and women businesses and applicants. And then last, policy. HB 2 in 2018, a lot of what enabled the commission to move forward quickly was a direct mandate to promulgate emergency regulations. We have existing high quality medical cannabis regulations. There are tweaks that need to be made to accommodate an adult use market, and an emergency directive will significantly cut down on the time that would be needed in order to either license existing businesses to operate in an adult use market, or to move forward quickly, or both, to move forward quickly with additional licensing to accomplish the same. So we certainly have other thoughts, but we didn't want to leave you without anything about a transition to adult use. And with that, I will stop unless Jeff's got anything else, and we're happy to take any questions.
Good to go.
All right, we're going to take some questions. 3 so far have popped up here. So we'll start with Delegate Lutke, then Chair Wilson, then Vice Chair Moon. So Delegate Lutke to begin, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So Mr. Kelly, Mr. Tilburg, I appreciate the presentation. On the IT issue you mentioned, Mr. Tilburg, I understand you have this existing structure for the medical dispensaries, but you don't currently collect tax from medical dispensaries. Somebody's going to have to collect that tax. I would assume that we're going to place that authority under the comptroller's office, and that'll end up in Compass anyway. So, are you saying long-term it's something that's doable and maybe we can fold it in under Compass, but now's not the time to do it? Or are you saying that these systems really just are not and never will be compatible?
I'm sorry for a lack of clarity there, Delegate. I was simply stating that the procurement of the system is something that should likely be a priority, whether it's an existing system, expanding it to accommodate a new category of business, or it's procuring something else. That's something that would be needed. But to take a step back, Jeff's talked in previous meetings about his understanding of the timeline and talking to the comptroller's office of expanding to have a cannabis only tax collection, or adding cannabis specifically to the existing software of around 12 months or so. The seed to sale system, currently metric, but whatever would be used at the time, does have the capability relatively quickly to accurately track sales so that there are reports, so you can conduct tax enforcement. So before you have software, people will be still required to make payments. And the cannabis seed to sale software that exists, both the ones we're currently using and others that are available on the market, do provide a mechanism for accurate reporting so the state can verify whether the tax being paid is what should be paid. And so that's where the expansion of the existing seed to sale contract to encompass adult use, that modification would be necessary pretty quickly. We're already inquiring how quickly we could do that. If that's, if the referendum is successful and that's how the state moves forward, but that could be a stopgap piece if there's not specific tax software available at the outset.
But the seed to sale tracking is only important for the purposes of taxation if we implement an excise tax based on weight or quantity, right? If we do an ad valorem tax, it's moot.
Well, it's also tied in at the point of sale, so that the retail sales would be registered. So if you had a 10% tax at the register, that's also something. But there are different approaches in different states.
Your system also records the sale values.
Yes.
Okay.
So there are a number of taxation approaches, as you're well aware now, in the country related to cannabis. And in brief discussions that we've had with the seed to sale providers, both the one we currently have and other competitors in the marketplace, they are able to accommodate the tax that is chosen by the state. So you're specific about an ad valorem. I can follow up with that specifically, but it's my understanding that if the state determines, they can set up the software to accommodate that request, because all of the data regarding the weights of everything and the sales of everything is within that system.
So then here's my question, and maybe it's a question you are not willing or can't answer at the moment, which is fine. But given that the comptroller's office is saying, I'm happy to hear you say 12 months, because I've heard more than 12 months lead time for implementing cannabis taxation of recreational cannabis. Wouldn't your system just be able to do it if you're tracking already the price? Don't we already have the structure for that under your IT system?
So I'm not the expert on the comptroller, will be the expert on that length of time. That was my recollection from a year ago, Jeff's presentation. So if
Sure.
that's outdated, that's fine.
What I'm saying is your system already exists.
But it's not, what it's not is a portal to pay taxes.
Sure.
It is a way for the state to verify that amounts being paid is accurate. So that's very helpful information, and can help as a stopgap measure before there's an IT system or solution. But I don't think it should be considered the solution in and of itself.
So here's my question for you then, Mr. Chairman, and then I'll stop talking, I promise. Can you get a
And
sense?
here's my question 4 times. I'm just waiting for the question to happen. I don't know when it's going to happen.
Can you? I've asked like 16 questions. What are you complaining about, Mr. Tilburg? Can you
Welcome to judiciary. All right.
Can you get a sense of whether your system would be able to be adapted to accept tax remittances, tax payments more quickly than the comptroller system apparently can? Because
I don't have that information. So I'm happy to, we have ongoing discussions. This has not been one of them. And
Sure.
so I'm happy to follow up with them directly and then reach out to your office and share more broadly with the work group.
that would be fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
With just one more question now, Chair Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry to step away from the exciting world of taxation, but we
You can barely wait. It's-
right. Will, I wanted to talk. Will and Jeff. But I'll do it in March order. So we'll talk. The most important thing, obviously, is testing. I think it's important for everyone who's listening to understand. Number one, Will, I'm very happy and impressed with what has been set up for the medical marijuana. I think people need to really be mindful of the fact that this is almost like a health inspection, as far as this is something that's being consumed by the body. You can't use pesticides. There are things that, and I'm very glad that you test for heavy metals, for pesticides, and everybody listening needs to understand, because the mom and pop ideology sounds great until you realize the amount of testing that has to go into us, because we're consuming this. And I want to say that I'm very appreciative of the amount of effort you put into the medical marijuana side. I hope that we can transfer all of that stick-to-itiveness into the recreational marijuana. But my question about the lab testing is, why do we need a lab? Why can't we just use civilian labs? And this, by the way, is my first question. This is for you, Will. I apologize.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Health and safety is critical, and it's one of the pieces that separates the regulated market from the illegal market for the reasons you touched on. For pesticides, heavy metals, we've identified in the existing private labs. So this will segue to the response. Salmonella positives that we were able to catch before a product is sold. And so these are really critically important pieces. Cannabis is at one time a dietary supplement, prescription drug, and a food. And so that is a lot of different things. And so testing is really critically important. What we have learned from other states, particularly the most mature states on the West Coast, is that having a state reference laboratory is critical to compliance matters. So there are chain of custody issues if you're involving a private lab, and then also to ensure that the private labs who are financial beneficiaries of licensees are fully compliant. You need the ability to test what they're testing to confirm it.
And so do you envision actually allowing, we do have private labs operating now, correct?
Yes, there are 4 currently.
And so we'll continue to use those with your oversight that's your view, correct?
Yes, 100%. They're critical to this space in the same way that Jeff has the ability to access the comptroller's alcohol lab to see what's in a product for health and safety reasons. It would not be taking over the laboratory testing. It would be working to set methodologies and standards and to do spot check compliance testing to ensure that the regulations were being upheld.
Okay, because and again, I just for those listening, how important it is because of what we're consuming, that these labs and the tests, and I've watched and seen the work that you've done and the amount of time it actually takes to make sure that we're not selling a product, and also the traceability, well, obviously from seed to sale, so that if we do find something deadly, something that gets people sick, that we can go right back to the source without having to guess, which is again the importance of this regulation. So I appreciate that. Jeff, on the same testing, I just want to make sure I do understand for the other side of your job right now, which is the alcohol. You do some testing for the breweries, the wineries, and things of that nature, correct? To ensure that they're—
No, sir, we don't. No, surprisingly, we don't. When the items that we do testing for are when we find product being sold on the street outside of the regular framework of the sales. And we're not testing. We're testing more for the presence of alcohol, not so much the public health concern generally, but to see if the items that are being sold are being sold in an illegal manner. If those products are, yeah.
So Jeff, does anybody test a mom and pop brewery or a winery to make sure that there's not arsenic in the wine? They
are subject to the health department regulations, but not to the ATC.
All right, we might have to fix that. I appreciate that. I wanted to ask about and this is offline, or again, the two of you I'd obviously like to meet because to see what you would envision as far as what your new budget would look like, because obviously you would be combining your budget as well as how many people that you would be employing total. And Will, you said something about roughly 60% of your employees are contract. You seem to have a pretty sexy budget. So could you tell me what the rationale is or what the reason is behind that?
The commission has not received additional mayor positions since 2018. So we have periodically submitted requests. They have not been approved to date.
So it's not the budget that's the issue. It's us giving you pins.
Yes.
Okay. We talked about, and the arresting authority, obviously this is for clarification, because I know there are some folks out here that are paranoid about enforcement, but again, we are talking about ensuring that individuals are selling something that's safe to consume. And I know, Jeff, you've been doing this for years with, alcohol, tobacco, making sure that what comes across state lines is actually acceptable, what we, consume in our bodies. But Will, at this point, you don't have any enforcement powers, correct?
That's
beyond
correct.
Taking someone's license.
That's correct.
Okay. And so that's, all right. Lastly, almost lastly, it would be nice to talk to both of you about how you envision this would look as far as a number of individuals. As I mentioned earlier, I don't believe the goal for this legislation is to get Marylanders high. I believe it's taken out of the criminal stream of commerce. As such, any excess tax will basically prevent that from happening. My goal, obviously, my vision would be something where we tax it just as much as we need to enforce it. But that means it starts with you two as far as what do you envision as far as consumption? And I know that's a difficult one, but Will, I've heard you're a genius at this, is what you envision the consumption will be and how the proper oversight and accountability, because we want to do it, I would hope, the same way that you do to medical marijuana. And there's a lot of testing that's going on. There's a lot of oversight and accountability. all the way to the dispensaries, and then it gets a little loose. So I would like to meet with you guys later. I'm not going to ask the question now, to determine just what that number of people look like. So we can make sure that we tax this properly so you get the support you deserve, and we deal with some of the issues I know Will has with the dispensaries and how they're kind of falling through the cracks. I believe that's all I have for now. But one last thing, Jeff Kelly, you don't get any asset forfeiture monies, do you?
No, sir, we don't.
Anything you seize, you don't get to keep, correct?
No, sir, it goes back to general fund. There is one exception to that relative to our work in tobacco. And it's not so easy, but it's in partnership with the federal government. If we make seizures of a certain amount, we turn that over to, in our case, generally the ATF, and then the ATF decides if they're going to adopt the case. If they do, then we're subject. We get some portion of that back.
I was just trying to put Vice Chair Moon at ease, but okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Let's find out if that worked. We'll go now to Vice Chair Moon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate this presentation. It seems like one huge unknown here is just how many licensees we're going to have. It sounds to me like a lot of the activities, testing, and enforcement you're mainly talking about is with respect to license holders. But, you know, I don't exactly know how this world is going to unfold, but here's my question. How many licenses based on your experiences with alcohol, tobacco, and medical cannabis will it actually take to minimize the persistence of an illegal black market or gray market, and to get most people who are procuring marijuana or cannabis products to do it through a tested legal channel? I mean, the numbers you threw out, the disparity was, I think you said something like we have thousands of alcohol and tobacco licenses and a couple hundred on the cannabis side. And so to me, this is a huge question. It relates to how much staff you're going to have, how much work you're going to have, what types of enforcement you're going to do. But it seems to me we can't answer this without knowing what that looks like. Are we moving cannabis to the alcohol world or not? And if not, aren't we going to have a big black market? So maybe you could put some clarity on this. How many licenses do we need?
If I could just start on the alcohol side of it and tobacco side, with tobacco licenses, we have probably maybe a couple of hundred people that are licensed as wholesalers or manufacturers. Not so many, and electronic devices manufacturers. But with retailers for tobacco, there are about 6,000 or so, give or take 500 at any time because it's a moving number, but about 6,000 retailers across the state for tobacco. For alcohol, we get closer to 8,000 locations. That being, and I'm just about retail, from manufacturers, permit holders across the country. When I mentioned the thousands that we issue, that's what we issue. Those are manufacturers. Those are wholesalers. Those are wineries across the country that want to do business with us. There are other producers across the country that want to do business with us. They are not the retail location. The retail locations, each of those are distributed by local jurisdictions. Each local liquor board does all the retail. And you're getting close to 7,500 to 8,000 outlets in the state for alcohol, compared to what Will had mentioned, maybe 100 or two. And I don't know that they're all retail or dispensaries. I think there's also a lot of grow. I mean, we have many more retailers than we have manufacturers or distributors. I think it may be the other way for cannabis. And Will, if you want to chime in on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's a magic number here, and I'll try and provide two examples to crystallize the point. Oklahoma has 10,000 cannabis licenses in a medical only market, and they have incredible issues with diversion and the illicit market that 10,000 licenses has not been able to capture. And on the flip side, a state like Maine, which is very large but with a smaller population, centralized in the southeastern part of the state, has done an incredible job in just 2 years of limiting the illicit market, where I think 75% of cannabis users are obtaining from the legal sources, which is a high number compared to a lot of Western states. So it's not, I don't think the number of licenses is one factor. And if it's related to getting a sufficient amount of product out there for consumers dispersed across the state, then it does matter, but it's not just the more that you have is going to get rid of the illicit market.
I'm sorry, and if I may just follow up on that, I don't mean to, I understand your point, but I mean, it seems with 200 licenses, 400 licenses, and we've left these unlicensed activity as a criminal offense, jailable criminal offense, multi-year term might apply to you. But you would agree that with the numbers we're talking about, we're guaranteeing the persistence of people purchasing untested product, right? If we're sort of at a multiplier of the number of licenses in the medical system, it's almost guaranteed we'll have illicit, off the books, untested purchases continuing, correct?
Without knowing the number and where they're located, it's really difficult to give you an answer there. And again, the illicit market is not zero anywhere in the country right now, despite the different models that exist. So I think it's one piece of the puzzle. Certainly, when you look at adult use states across the country, 19 in DC, putting DC away aside because they don't have a commercial market, they tend to have more licenses than Maryland currently has within its medical market. And they've had mixed results in being able to significantly reduce or eliminate the illicit market.
And sorry, last bit here for Mr. Kelly, going back to the alcohol and tobacco side of this, I mean, you would agree too, right? That at some point when you hit a scale of, and I don't want to make it about the number of licenses per se, we're talking about the ease of a frictionless transaction, right? I mean, it's just how close is it to you? Is it at a price point that you can tolerate? What level of legal risk are you undertaking by engaging in that transaction? It's a matrix of economic and non-economic choices. But again, the medical system doesn't seem to me to satisfy those questions. So on the alcohol and tobacco end, would you say that a larger distribution and availability makes it sort of not worth it for a lot of people to do the sort of unlicensed activity we're seeing in the cannabis world?
That's a part of it. I think one, there really is no significant lack of availability for product. You also have to consider cost. There's, Maryland's excise taxes have always been competitive in the sense that they've been lower than a lot of other states, not higher. So Maryland has traditionally been a source state for product. There would be other consumers from other states would come into Maryland to buy our product because our excise taxes are relatively low. And so they want to buy from us. They don't want to buy from another state and bring it into us. So there's really not that. We're an attractive state, even though we have a higher sales tax on it now at 9%. We're still an attractive state by and large, or at least equally attractive now to our surrounding states. And with the cannabis, yeah, I mean, you bring up some good points. I think it's important that we educate why you want to go with the legitimate product and not the illicit product. I think we want to create a framework that encourages compliance. And by that, I mean, we get into enforcement, and I think enforcement scares people. When I'm talking enforcement from our perspective, and Will and I have had this conversation, if it's something as simple, in addition to whatever licenses they must have to be involved in that trade, like alcohol has to have an alcohol license from us, but they also have to have, just very simply, in some instances, a business license. Just a very cheap, inexpensive license you get from the clerk of the court. But here's the thing. If you're on the street corner selling cannabis and still illicit product, we don't want to do any undercover buys. We don't want to get into any things. We don't do any of that. But I would like to be able to walk up to you and say, can you show me your sales and use license and your business license? And if you don't have it, I have to seize your product. It's evidence of you selling without a license. That might be a way to help coerce product to go into the lawful system. But so maybe something like that, which is really gentle, and what the individual receives is a citation, a ticket that's maybe a $300 fine or so, something along those lines. I mean, it's a very minimal thing. We issue those all across the state now for regular businesses that just don't have the appropriate licensure. But it gives us something to intercede when that transaction is happening, and maybe a way to deal with it a little bit of a softer level, but to impact the product that's out there. Just food for thought. But
Mr. Vice Chair, if I could just jump on one piece. We mentioned earlier that we had met recently with Washington, and talking with Washington and Oregon, who have thousands of licensees. They referenced how they get to do compliance inspections once every 2 or 3 years at a grower or processor. And so the point is there's also a public health and safety balance here. And there are many in the state that, 7,000 tobacco retailers is too much. And that's led to youth having greater access to those products. And so I think there's larger, there's other policy pieces here to the calculus as opposed to just the strict number.
All right, now with his question, Delegate Lutke.
Mr. Chairman, I already had a bite at the apple. I'm happy to let Delegate Grammer go first.
All right, we'll let Delegate Grammer go before Delegate Lutke. Delegate Grammer, please.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to ask, we hear lots of, when you talk to industry partners, you hear a lot about other states and where illicit product does come from. Who is our enforcement agent for that? Is it the state police? I mean, is it just general crime tracking, understanding where that black market really comes from? Who is the enforcement agent there?
I'll take a stab at that, Will. That's going to be, as you mentioned, general police. It's going to be your state police. It's going to be your local police departments, your county police departments, municipalities. They're charged to enforce all laws of the state. And they would enforce that presumably as they would any other legal violation. We don't specifically, the ATC specifically does not have the authority to do that. Our authority is very limited to cover the areas of violations concerning alcohol and tobacco at this point.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. We'll now go to Delegate Lutke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Tilburg, can we go back for a second to the conversation about the contractual and temporary employees? So you mentioned those folks don't have access to the state employee pension system and retirement benefits. Are there other benefits they don't have access to right now?
Paid vacation.
They don't have any paid vacation?
They're able to work overtime to accrue compensation time.
Is your agency authorized? Are the employees of your agency authorized to bargain collectively?
The merit positions are eligible to be within the state union, is my understanding.
But the temporary contractual employees wouldn't be able to bargain collectively?
I don't believe so.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Any further questions here? Seeing none, we certainly thank both of you for taking time this evening to speak with us. I think this was very, very informative and appreciate both of your time. We are going to wrap up here for the evening. I want to thank everybody again, Mr. Tilburg, Mr. Kelly, Claire Rossmark, and Aaron Hopwood for joining us. We appreciate your time and expertise. If work group members have further questions for any of our guests, they'd like us to forward those questions on, you can email Dylan Goldberg at dylan.goldberg@mlis.state.md.us. He will connect you with them. Work group members, as of right now, we have scheduled 2 additional virtual meetings so far. I would anticipate we will have several more between now and the start of session. On Tuesday, November 1st at 7 p.m., we're going to have a presentation from Matt Swinburne at the University of Maryland's Carey School of Law on the Social Equity Toolkit, a recently updated and detailed study of what states are doing across the nation regarding social equity and licensure, regarding cannabis legislation. And then on Tuesday, the 15th of November at 7 p.m., we'll hear about tax structures in other states and how they've changed their strategies regarding the taxation of recreational cannabis to move people from engaging with the underground market and moving to the legal market. In coming days, the notifications for these virtual meetings will be posted to MGA's website's hearing schedule, and work group members and those on our distribution list will also receive the information via email. I want to thank again everybody for your time this evening. Thank you again for participating, and I hope you all have a good night. Good evening.